Welcome to Improv Your Parenting, the art of turning parenting into play. We are joined today by Dr. Jim Ansaldo, a research scholar at the Center on Education and Lifelong Learning at Indiana Institute on Disability and Community from Indiana University Bloomington. For 20 years, he has conducted research, supported school change efforts, and facilitated teacher professional learning around applied improvisation, coaching, and consultation, culturally sustainable pedagogies, curriculum design, and online learning. Jim is a founder and co-director of Camp Yes And, an improv-based professional learning intensive for educators who support teens on the autism spectrum. Jim trained at the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science and leads improv-based workshops that support IU scientists, scholars, and health professionals to communicate about their research in clear, vivid, and engaging ways. Jim has worked with faculty at the IU School of Medicine to integrate improv with cognitive behavioral therapy to support youth with anxiety disorders. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on Improv Your Parenting.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. I have one question that I start all of these off with is, what interaction do you have with kids, and what role does improv play in that interaction?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to have personal and professional interactions. So certainly my own children who are adults now, but they're still my kids, nieces, nephews, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then on the professional side, I am the co-director of Camp Yes And, which is a pretty unique camp. It's an improv camp that combines professional learning for K-12 educators and related helping professionals and an improv summer camp experience for neurodivergent high school students. So, on the family side of things, I certainly played a lot of improv games with my kids. We're also tabletop gamers, so role-playing games and things like that have a big improv element in it. It's been a way to kind of liven up, like doing chores, like unloading the dishwasher and that sort of thing. And then on the professional side, I feel very fortunate because improv is such a practical and useful and powerful toolkit for educators and helping professionals. But my camp also lets me stay connected to working directly with young people, which I was a high school teacher, and I just love that I still get that opportunity to work with them.
That sounds incredible. So you are connected basically in every aspect of your life, it sounds like, in this space.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. When I applied for grad school, I wrote this, very young adult essay around wanting to stop having a fragmented life. Mm-hmm. And it kind of has happened in some ways, wow. And at least in this way that improv kind of is weaving all these pieces together.
So let me then start with kind of when you were applying to grad school. Is that before or after your improv journey began? And tell me about your improv journey.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was, I think, a freshman in college in my undergrad, mm-hmm. My second freshman year, I'm kind of a academic hobbit. The first year we kind of don't talk about.
I went through that too. It's really tough.
So during second breakfast, I took an intro to theater course, mm-hmm. and really liked the instructor. And she was the artistic director at a small black box theater in New Haven, Connecticut. And later that year, I was walking downtown and I saw the theater nearby, and I was like, "Oh, I'll go check it out. I've never seen it before." And on the door was a handwritten sign that said improv auditions. And I think at that time, I identified improv with the stand-up comedy show Evening at the Improv that was on after SNL, late at night, so stand-up comedy. But I walked in and I auditioned anyway. And I got cast in a show and I got put in classes. And so, that was the beginning of my improv journey. And then, a few years later, I graduated, was still doing improv, and entered into a master's program to get my teaching license to teach high school English. And so improv and teaching for me were right side by side. I was doing a lot in my classes to bring improv games in. I did my master's project around using improv as a teaching tool in the classroom. Wow. And I was lucky enough to get to student teach with an amazing high school teacher who was a teacher of the year, who taught English and theater, did not have an improv background, but trusted me and connected with me. And so I got to design an improv unit for one of his theater classes for students with disabilities. So this is like everything kind of coming together right there
Wow.
with teaching, equity, access for students with disabilities and improv.
Wow. And so when that all came together and you were recognizing the power of improv in spaces outside of theater, then in sort of like how do you help communities who are in need of communication, expression, stuff like that? Where did you then say, okay, you know what? I could use this even more and take it bigger and turn it into the camp and turn it into the professional work you do now.
Yeah, so that started, after I got my master's, I fell in love and moved across the country. And my wife and I taught in Chicago for a while. And in both of my high school teaching jobs, I got jobs with kids that honestly, like other people didn't want to work with. And I loved working with those kids. And in my job in Chicago, like I could tell stories all day about all that stuff. But basically, I had a lot of latitude because they created an alternative program, which is basically like a last chance for kids before they kicked them out of school.
Oh, wow.
So I got to co-teach all day with another guy who was an English and theater teacher. And we produced a show together that included improv and engaged those kids in it and all that.
And what was
then by the time go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just fascinated. What was the outcome of that in terms of producing that show and the result for these kids?
It felt like a lot of success for them.
Yeah.
It was, this was 1997. So like we were doing stuff that felt really kind of cutting edge. Like we had them write monologues, for example, that we like kind of improvised and then wrote down that focused on things like myths about like in different cultures about the end of the world, dreams for their future, like all these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went out in the community and filmed video to kind of intersperse between these performance segments. So it was kind of this multimedia performance piece. And I think, for them, like that's the kind of stuff that kids who are in gifted programs get to do.
Yeah.
But kids who are gifted, who are not in gifted programs don't get to do,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, well, I know, they told me that it opened up new possibilities and new interests for them.
That's awesome.
At the same time, I really recognized after a few years of teaching that there was a lot more that I needed to learn.
Yeah.
Because, I also had in that class like a high school senior who couldn't functionally read. And I was not prepared as a high school English teacher to teach kids to read, not at a basic level, And we were just starting in the field to think about things like universal design and all that sort of stuff to give more access and more pathways to learning. So, I recognized that I wanted to go back to school and learn more.
And so then you were continuing before I interrupted with my question. What happened after?
So I went to school at IU Bloomington,
Mm-hmm.
and I chose a doctoral program that had the fewest required classes because I very much wanted to build a program that focused on what at the time was called multicultural education, but I now might call like equity education or equity pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
But it allowed me to take courses in like the School of Anthropology and the School of Music and all these different places. Because, I really was like, well, I wrote this little grant in Chicago to fund this cool performance program. I want to do more of that. And I want to connect it even more strongly to what the students need and like transformation for teachers. And so, I was lucky enough to end up working on a research project at the Center on Education and Lifelong Learning, which I work at now.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there for 25 years. And so that center focuses on teacher professional learning and facilitating school change projects and stuff like that. And I was able to bring improv into that work in a lot of different ways. And then ultimately in 2015, I went to a conference of the Applied Improvisation Network and met Lacey Alana, who at the time was living in Austin, Texas, and now lives in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And we came up with this idea for Camp Yes And.
Oh, glorious. And tell me a little bit about that.
So I went to Lacey's presentation, which was about improv classes she was teaching for autistic youth and young adults in Austin. And just the handout, like I scanned it and emailed it to like a dozen people after the session, and it's rare for me to go to a conference and be that excited about what I've seen and heard from somebody.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like breathlessly ran up to Lacey and I was like, "You're great. And we need to do this in Indiana. And I need you to come out and help me." And she was like, "Okay."
Wow. What awesome karma for the two of you to be able to come together like that and recognize the
Yeah.
power of what was being offered and created.
Yeah.
So much there. You mentioned one thing that I want to go back to real quick is you said both you and your wife taught in Chicago. Is that so? Is she an improviser as well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
She's not.
Oh, all right.
She's a special educator,
Uh-huh.
but she was teaching geometry courses at the time. So we actually engaged her student to build the set pieces for our production
Cool.
because we wanted just these kind of like plain black geometric shapes
Mhm.
that we could move and stack and, build different things. So we brought her class in to do that. And so for me, that was another great kind of application of connecting with students with disabilities, connecting improv to academics and that sort of thing.
Wow. And so now I want to then dive into the more personal stuff, your family. You said you have adult kids. Tell me about sort of the child raising experience and where and how improv sort of played a role in that.
Yeah, for sure. So we had both of our kids at home. And when my oldest son was 3, like we potty trained him because he loved reading so much. Like even before he could read, he just loved books. And we got a little wooden potty chair with a book rack on it, and he would just go
sit there.
sit down and read books.
Glorious.
And like potty training was painless. So
Wow.
like for me, that's even that is just an example of yes and, right?
Yeah, tell me about that.
Like so here's a passion that my kid had,
Uh-huh.
and there's this skill, for self-management that I need to teach him. So, my wife and I both have the advantage of being educators, but also a love of passive education like John Dewey or Maria Montessori, like those kinds of early childhood models that are about like let kids roam and be curious.
Yes.
And follow their interest and connect that to and skills and things that you want them to develop. So for me, that kind of progressive education and improv went right hand in hand. It made me very comfortable in that role. So then, when he was 3, he said he wanted to start school, and we're like, okay, school starts Monday. We started school and we continued. We homeschooled both of our kids up until high school, at which time they chose to go to public high school. And we did that in a cooperative model with other families in Bloomington, which again, is just a collaborative kind of effort that, for me, improv informs everything about communication and connection and collaboration for me. And one of the classes that my wife taught for our kids was called Let's Make a Play. And so they would write and put on their own production every year, and improv came into that. And then, like I had said before, like I would teach them improv games, maybe in the context of a class, and then I would see them playing it with their friends on the lawn. Like there's a game called Movement Evolution or Reflection Circle.
Okay.
Somebody starts a movement and a sound and turns to the person next to them, and that person needs to repeat it as closely as possible. And it goes around the circle. And of course, because we're human beings, it's going to change over time. It gets very silly, and it can go on forever. So I would pull in the driveway and see this circle of reflection and movement of kids in my front lawn until they're all like falling down dizzy.
When you had kids, and it sounds like you made a conscious decision to home educate them. Was there a based on the kid reason for that, or based on your own sort of this is what we want for our kids anyway, or was there a combination of that?
It was a combination of things. When my wife and I got together, we had talked about, we worked together at a Muscular Dystrophy Association summer camp, which she had worked at for years and years. And I did it a couple years with her before we moved out of the Chicago area. So we had talked about starting a school or a camp or those kinds of things already.
Mm-hmm.
And then th- there, there's a lot, there's a lot that's wonderful and worthy about public education. And I think teachers are incredibly valuable.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there were some freedoms we wanted to have, even just as teachers. So, for my wife to be able to homeschool and structure the day the way she wanted, to be able to have education that's active in the community, to be able to integrate subject areas rather than kind of have them taught in isolation.
Yeah.
And then for me, I have a family history with a lot of medical issues and things like that. So, like, just the issue of food was very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids were able to grow up listening to their bodies, and when they're hungry, they eat and they have good food available,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not, having to deal with like a lot of the junk food and all that kind of stuff. So, like, I just felt like if even for the first few years, I can help them to learn like what good, real, nutritious food tastes like,
Yeah.
and let that be their baseline instead of the other kinds of things that get offered in school environments, whether it's through the school lunch program or from peers. That was a big deal to me. So
Yeah.
it was a combination of things.
One of the things that is compelling about what you're saying there is also you did it with the community. So there were other parents and families involved. Can you describe a little bit of what that looked like and how everybody played their part?
Yeah. Well, part of it stemmed right from our childbirth education courses. Bloomington had a group called BABS, Bloomington Area Birth Services. So for people who were considering home birth, or again, this was right around the year 2000. So hospital birth at the time was an even more sort of strict, almost like viewed as a medical emergency kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for us, we're like, yeah, some births are emergencies, but that's like not the norm for us as people. We've been doing that
For a long
for as
time.
long as we've been people. So those classes were wonderful because they didn't dictate people's choices. There were people who were planning on having hospital births that went to those classes, but it really helped people to kind of be in charge and figure out their own plan.
Mm.
So we're already connecting with people who want to be in charge and figure out their own plan, and stayed connected with them. And I credit my wife because she's one of these people, like, if you go to the farmer's market in Bloomington with her, you'll be lucky to buy a single piece of produce because every 5 minutes somebody's stopping to talk to her because they love her. They're inspired by
Nice.
her. Their
Wow.
kids were taught by her,
Oh, wow.
So really, she should be on this podcast.
I would love to interview
It's
her
just
too.
that I'm an improv.
Wow. So that sounds like the two of you are an awesome sort of dynamic duo in this space. And getting into your kids then, did you make a conscious choice to say, okay, we're going to do improv with the kids? Or was it sort of all your training, all your education, all your work already? It's just sort of, well, of course, that's what we did because that's what we do. Or was it something in between there as well?
Maybe kind of something in between, because we made a very conscious choice to just involve our kids in our lives. Like, we didn't stop going to see friends just because we had kids. We packed them up and brought them with us. We didn't have a whole like parallel menu we were preparing for our food. We had, a simpler version of what we were making. And we brought them out to the garden with us and all that kind of thing. So, I'm a big nerd. And like, as soon as my kids, well, we were doing imaginative play right away. So there's improv in there already.
Yeah.
But then as soon as my kids were like into storytelling, we started playing Dungeons and Dragons,
Nice.
which was a very simplified version of like, tell me something you want to do and then roll a die and we'll see if it happens. So a lot of improvisation there. But then with the homeschooling, those were some deliberate choices around which games and how that fed into the playwriting process when they were doing that in class and that sort of thing.
And so as your kids were growing up with these other kids who are being home educated as well in this community, How did they then sort of take on the mantle of the intrinsic motivation to do what it is they were interested in? And what did that look like in terms of, how you supported that process?
Yeah. So again, my wife was, lead on this, but they would actually be involved with planning the classes that they wanted to take.
Okay.
And we used Indiana state standards as a guideline,
Mhm.
but not as like a strict sort of like you must be at this level at this age kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Because we did not want to make the choice for them that they would have to be homeschooled forever. Like if they
Yeah.
wanted to transition into public schooling, we wanted that for them.
Okay.
And that was really successful for them. So yeah, so really, again, we could connect this to like a John Dewey or a Montessori or to an improv thing, but really giving them voice and choice in what they were studying.
I want to dive a little bit more into that then. What does that look like? So how does the child who you're working with get to make that choice? And then how do you support that choice or enable them to do that?
Well, a simple example is we have a wonderful library in Bloomington. Monroe County Public Library is one of the best in the country, I would argue. It's as exciting for a kid as if you brought them to a toy store and said, grab anything you want.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they're looking through all these books and, the children's librarians there, like nothing excites them more than a kid who's excited about a book,
Totally. Yeah.
So the librarians were our partners in that, we would walk into the library and they would have a stack of books like, oh, I was thinking about Diego or Paolo this week and I pulled these books for them.
Oh,
So,
nice.
as a kid wanders around and they pull a book on a subject and you see that it grabs their attention and they want more books, then, we pull that and that's your reading instruction. That's your writing instruction.
Mm-hmm.
And then so many of those things connect to science and math. Like my older son in particular got very interested in space and robotics and all that kind of stuff. So we were really easily able to connect to those pieces. So yeah, it's just again for me, like, like when you're a carpenter, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
So like for me, this is like building a scene. Like
Mhm.
somebody makes an offer and I accept that offer and then I add something to it and then they add and we build it up. And that's really what the educational process was like.
Wow. As they got older and say in their teenage years and they were debating, homeschool versus going to public school, how did you sort of enable them to think that through and make that decision for themselves based on what they were looking for?
Well, for me, one of the other areas of work that I have a lot of training in is around like consultation and problem solving. And that's very much about using reflective communication to help somebody get clear, a concern or an idea or that kind of thing, and then gather information that we need to see what our options are and then make the best choice and move forward.
Mhm.
So, they were really at a point where, again, my older son, like the high school has a robotics club and they have engineering classes and all this kind of stuff that, there were things that he wanted academically that we could have offered it, but the high schools had a lot to offer.
Yeah.
And again, in Bloomington, we're lucky because we had a choice among a large kind of traditional public high school
Mhm.
and a really small project-based learning high school,
Oh, okay.
which is the one they ended up choosing. And like they were ripe for that, for
Really?
working in teams
Oh,
with
nice.
kids and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, so really helping them to clarify, what they were wanting and look at the options. And it's like, give it a try. Like worst comes to worst, we can go back to what we've been doing, which was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as they then navigated post high school and were thinking about, potentially university or vacation or whatever floated their boat, what was your role in enabling that process? Was it similar to the high school decision or did it expand out into something more than that?
Similar. I
Mhm.
think it's more to consider in terms of finances and all that kind of piece. So, we did a lot more assisting with the FAFSA and all that kind of stuff and applications. And I, in particular, as a writing teacher, help them with, college
The
essays
essays.
and things like
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, looking at the different options. And, for me, I always said, in retrospect, if I had to do it all over again, the one thing I might change would be to get my bachelor's degree for as little debt as possible. Just
Yeah.
recognizing that there are very few bachelor's degrees that automatically gain you entry into a career.
Yeah.
And I might consider a technical program or a trade
Mm.
even before that to
Mhm.
kind of get some money going and then do school more
Mhm.
slowly. And each of my kids has sort of chosen a different path in that regard.
Yeah. And what now, as it sounds like around 25 years old for the older one, because you said it was 2000 when you were going through the early baby stuff.
Yeah, so he'll be 24 this summer.
24. Where is that path led for him?
So for him, he's got certifications around development.
Mhm.
That also led to an associate's degree. And now he's contemplating going to school for a bachelor's degree or something like that.
Very cool.
And
Yeah.
then from my younger son, he knew he was interested in like physical therapy, athletic training kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And a benefit of me of working for Indiana University is reduced tuition. So that,
Nice.
made the most sense for him.
Yeah. What a great deal. I have one more question in terms of the childhood, the personal family side. Is I imagine at some point there was conflict for whatever reason. How did you, using sort of the nature of improv, which was inherent in most everything you do anyway, use that to diffuse any conflicts you had?
Mm. That's an interesting question. I might have to, I don't know just it was. Part of it I'll say is like when I was a teenager, I got super into punk rock and stuff like that.
Okay.
So like I remember when my younger son was like 3 years old and he was, sassing me. And I sat there thinking like I am a giant compared to you. And yet you are like standing up to me and giving me a piece of your mind. And
Yeah.
I was like, please don't lose that. Like, I
Right?
want you to hang on to that. I want you to
Yes.
listen to me, but don't lose that.
Exactly. How did you balance
Um,
that? I want you to listen to me, but don't lose that. Like that's such a key, thing to try to maintain, but yet,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, people talk about choosing your battles, and I think that's true. I really tried hard. I don't know that I was always successful, but I tried hard to use the loud, listen to me right now voice for things that were like emergencies, like if they were about to run out into the street and a car is coming. Like if I shout stop, really need you to stop
Yeah.
then. And maybe this connects to improv somehow, like because I just kind of knew like if you're always like that, they're going to drown you out.
Yeah.
It's not going to have any impact. So I guess I do draw from my improv experience to know sort of like what has impact on people.
Mhm.
And of course, that connects to teacher training also in terms of like knowing about things like cognitive load and that kind of thing. So I think really being mindful about the way I used power and
Mhm.
status, which, those are things I know about from improv.
Yeah.
Then really helping them understand the repercussions of actions. And again, like we use lots of storytelling tools in improv that help us to build chains of cause and effect, and so helping a kid to see the impact of their actions. And, our kids who would say to us that like our disappointment was worse than any punishment we could offer.
Really?
Um,
What does that look
so
like? Tell me about that.
again, well, like again, I'm going to make this about improv.
Yeah.
Like a good scene is really about the relationships,
Yes.
right? It's not about what happens in the scene. It's about how that affects people.
Mhm.
So I think we had a lot of good fortune that included all the factors that led us to be educated as parents in the way that we were and to have the resources we had and all that. And that enabled us to build good, close relationships with our kids so that, they know I'm not out here just trying to control them or make them do what I want, that I generally, have a pretty good reason for things. And I also just took some cues from my dad. Like when I got my driver's license, he just told me, like, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told your brother. If you've ever had too much to drink, you call me, I will come and get you, and I won't say a word about it. And I saw that happen. So like when, like, again, an improv thing, like we say, got your back to each other before we go on stage, right? But like my kids knew that about both of us.
They knew you meant it.
Yeah. We're not just going to ask them to do something or not do something because, we're looking to exercise control or we want them to be exact copies of us.
So that brings up, I guess, a two-part question then is, what was or is your objective in parenting, if you have one? Like if you have this is what I want out of parenting. And with that as well is, what is your role as a parent? Like what in your perspective makes like you feel I was successful as a parent today or, over the course of time?
Yeah, really, in a lot of ways, it's similar to teaching. One of the concepts that was most important for me in special education is the idea of self-determination. That, that's really a goal for special educators. And it's really interesting that sometimes we only talk about that in the context of students with disabilities, as though, like
Everybody needs it.
Everybody has a right, and it's one of the core human needs, power and freedom. We also need community and love and all those kinds of things. So I guess, those are kind of the two things that I wanted to provide, the basic needs for my kids and help them make choices that would open up more choices and, for that self-determination piece, and to do it in connection with others as a family, as a community.
Wonderful. That sounds like a very good set of goals as a parent, to be like, it's not about me. It's not about, I'm going to tell you what to do. It's about how do I enable you to be what you want to be, whatever that is, and empower you for that. Yeah. I want to transition now, if we can, as the parent of two autistic kids myself. I really want to learn a lot more about Camp Yes And. Tell me about it, and what it is you do there and how you do it, and what results you've seen based on that.
Okay. So I'm going to give away a trade secret.
Oh no, don't do
it. That might cost me some future bookings, but improv just works.
Right?
Like people, they don't do it as much anymore, but especially when we first started, people would email me for like the magic secret list of improv games that work for autistic kids.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's just improv. And honestly, like, the secret of Camp Yes And has always been that it's about the adults. It's about the educators.
Really?
It's about learning to create the conditions for student success.
Wow.
That the lack of success or even, disability is socially constructed.
Yes.
That means that it's not located inside of any individual. And I was able to, Lacey and I, in our first year of camp, we met speech language pathology grad student named Rachel, who was part of our team for years. And she was wonderful because she talked to us about how the field of speech communication was recognizing that speech communication problems were things that happen between people, not things that are like located in me or in you.
Yeah.
So what we do at camp is we create the conditions for people to, first of all, improv allows you to draw on all your prior knowledge and experience. And so just talking as an educator, those are optimal learning conditions. When I can use my prior knowledge and experience to connect to what's being taught that's new, I'm much more likely to be successful and move forward.
Yeah.
When I don't have enough prior knowledge or experience, it's going to be frustrating. It might be boring, it might be both. So at camp, we work a lot on just creating that atmosphere where people can be free to express themselves and share what they know and can do, to take some risks. And then improv, as you know, is just this technology for we can take two very different things and mush them together and make a story out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we like when they're two very different things rather than two very similar things.
It's much more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So for teachers and students then to play together, a lot of what happens is it removes the fear that some teachers have of working with autistic students or other neurodiverse students, because one of the unintended outcomes of special education has been to send the message that you have to have some magical set of knowledge to work with kids with disabilities. And you don't.
Yeah.
You don't. Yeah.
That's good to hear, because you often see, there's a sort of a mentality of, unless you've had special training and you have these certain certs, we're not going to let you into the room with, neurodivergent kids. It's like, well, because they're just kids. It's just, what's the difference?
Right. And they belong in the room in the first place.
Yes.
It shouldn't. Nobody should have to prove their right to belong in society.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so tell me about what that looks like. How does that play out? What do you do to create an environment where that occurs?
Yeah. So, our camp day is structured so that the morning we work with educators and other professionals and teach them improv games, and they get time to be learners themselves. They get time to build their own comfort and safety and remember that play is fun and we can learn from play. And, educators get told what to do by everybody, and it's critical that they're decision makers. We don't have, and I don't think we ever will have, computers or scripted curricula or anything like that that's going to remove the need for a teacher or any other kind of human services helping professional to make decisions, to do what they think is in the best interest of the people under their care. And so first of all, we help them to feel restored and centered and reinvigorated. And then in the afternoon, when our students come, we're all playing the games together, so they get to see the impact on those students. And they're teachers are always looking for a trick, a tool, a thing, a free thing, whatever. They're incredible at getting the most out of resources. So I don't even have to do that work for them. Once they see us working with the kids and they're getting practice, they're stepping in, we're coaching them through facilitating the games and all, and they just leave the week having had a lot of fun and feeling like I can do this.
So let me expand that a little then. As a parent, is there anything you offer in that training that other parents might be able to be like, oh, I could use tips?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And we've had parents come to camp.
Yeah.
We often will advise them not to come with their kids.
Okay. So this is more of a training for them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Because for each of them to have sort of an opportunity to reinvent themselves outside of that established parent-child dynamic can be really important.
Yes.
So I would advise parents just that, have some spaces for you to explore being you. Because, in any kind of relationship, it's like improv again. If our improv becomes about improv, it misses the point. We run out of ideas, right? So if our relationships only become about the relationship, then it's really hard to sustain.
That brings up the question of, is it ever too early or too late for a parent to start learning these sort of skills and abilities?
No, I would say not, because what's really interesting about the field of applied improvisation is if we go back to Viola Spolin in America, who's,
Yes.
the mother of improv in America,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
She was a social worker and early childhood educator
Yes.
who got hired by the Roosevelt administration to produce publicly funded theater. And she had like lots of immigrants, European immigrants to work with who spoke different languages and didn't share culture and all. So she went back to her knowledge about how young children play together, particularly before they develop language, and designed improv games as a way to help people connect and collaborate.
Mm.
So like I often think if I got to talk with Viola Spolin about applied improvisation, she would be like, yeah, that's what it always was. It
Exactly.
was always a tool set, right?
Yeah.
And so like we've been doing this since we were 1, 2, 3 years old to some degree. So honestly, like for a parent who wants to learn improv, like you can start with your own kid
Yeah.
and see what they do already.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes naturally, doesn't it? And you sort
Yeah.
of know what to do because, yeah, you're born with it. But we often lose it through non-use, through society interaction with. And so how do we get that back?
And I call it like and I'm sure I didn't come up with this, but the editor in your head, that's what I often say to people who are, taking their first improv workshop with me is like, yes, I have a lot of experience on stage and I have sort of a pathological need for attention. But other than that, like everybody in this room has life experience.
Yes.
Improv is theater that's made up on the spot. It's made up out of those experiences. So like you don't have any less of that than I do.
Nice.
But what I have is a lot of practice in turning off the editor and stopping them from saying, no, don't say that, or that idea, you're going to sound stupid, or that's unoriginal, or whatever it is that stops you from expressing yourself.
Yeah.
Like little kids don't have that, and a lot of autistic individuals don't have that, at least in certain contexts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so so that's one of my favorite quotes from Camp Yesan was a teacher who at the end of the week said, several times this week, I found myself wishing that I was more like them.
Awesome.
And
so
like
awesome.
that,
More free,
that's
more
the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, that's why I want to do this work.
Exactly.
Right there.
Teaches people how to get out of their own way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a parent, that's actually usually a very important thing is let me get out of the way of this, whatever this is, with my kid. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can sound very simple to say like, show up and love them.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's
in some ways, right? And like simple doesn't mean easy.
No. So if you were talking to a new parent and they were trying to figure out what am I going to do with this new living being that's in my life, what kind of like first step advice might you give them to say, open yourself up to this, or, what can I do to at least start on the path to being the parent I want to be?
I would want to have a conversation with them that focuses at least in part on all that they already have, all the resources they have, the connections they have, the experience and skills that they have.
Yeah.
Because, that's often when we're living in fear, that's the stuff we forget about.
Yeah.
And then we could move on to, what are some questions? What information might we need? This is my problem solving brain, but let's get clear about what we know and can do and what questions we have. And let's find some answers to those questions. And generally, when we engage in that kind of reflective process with people, they start to come up with their own answers.
Yeah.
They really often don't need me to provide solutions for them.
Yeah. And that actually also sounds like a parenting approach is when your kids are dealing with something, it's using that same methodology because they kind of have what they need. It's just putting it together in a way that they can see, oh, here's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can offer information and my experience and all that when the time is right.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't do a good job of listening and promoting some reflection first, I might have a very different idea of the problem or the question than the person who's asking it. And at that point, if I'm offering solutions for a problem that you don't have, they might be great solutions, but they're not a
Useless.
fit for what you want. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's very sound advice, not just for parents, but generally. Just like whenever interacting with somebody else, it's listen to what they need and then work with them on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the improv connection for me, like I'll often say, and again, apologies to everybody that I stole this stuff from because I can't remember, but like the skill of a good improviser, it's not about like how original and creative your ideas are. It's about your ability to watch a scene or a game and see what the scene or what your partners need. It's needed here. And how can I step in and help support that?
Yeah.
And that's a whole different orientation than like worrying about the quality or originality or creativity of my ideas.
It gets you out of in your head and it puts you into what's required here and what can I offer, which
Yeah.
then frees you from any fear because you're not doing anything hard there. All you're doing is being like, oh, we need a hammer. Cool. Here's a hammer. Here.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. Yeah. And so then I guess relating it back to kids is looking at what they're offering and saying, what do you need? How do we do that? And so it's no longer about how do I run this thing? It's about how do I enable you based on what you're telling me or showing me is required here.
Yeah. I think, parenting requires a lot of presence, and there are a lot of stresses in our lives that pull us out of the present. I think this was a Brene Brown thing, something that's, like our brains are the things that can be regretful of the past or worried about the future, but our bodies are always in the present.
Yeah.
So another thing I would say is like, get into your body however you can. And, if that's hard to do with your child, I understand that. There are lots of ways you can do that with your child.
Mhm.
But if not, maybe that's where you can get some relief or something like that to spend some time, get back into your body. And that gets our brains a little bit away from the past and the future and back into the present.
I think that is a great place to be. And that's where all the play can happen is right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So awesome, Jim. Thank you so much for all of what you do and for now what you shared about what you do. I think it's fascinating. I love the idea of the camp. I think that there's a lot that you have offered families, communities, the medical that we didn't even get into, establishment, which we could definitely talk more about. Anything you want to add or share with anyone listening, watching that you just feel here's an important thing or a way to connect with you if that's something that they're looking for.
Yeah, sure. To connect, our camp website is yesand.indiana.edu.
Mhm.
There's a contact form there so you can get in touch and check out what we do. And, I would just say like, go out and do it. Go out and try it.
Yeah.
In so many different fields and professions, we're getting away from this like taking a long, long time to figure out the perfect product to develop and, getting more into like, let's put something out there and get some feedback on it.
Yeah. Do your MVP, right?
And so,
Yeah.
so, same thing with your kids, like try something, play a
Yeah.
game with them. And I say this a lot to people who try improv, when a game doesn't work or falls apart, if you can stay centered, you will be able to observe a lot of what your students or what your children need.
Mm.
And that information is gold.
Mhm.
So don't be afraid of mistakes. Don't be afraid of failures.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good that comes out of those things.
Yeah. That's what you learn from that. And then what you're able to adapt and put into the next time. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. I look forward to having more of them and to learning more about everything you do. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy.